Hello, everyone. My name is Carlos A.S. Lising. Welcome to caslTawk. Tonight I have two very special guests. They're super dear friends of mine. Over here on my left, to introduce them one by one, you're going to see over here is James Garoutsos. James, hold on for just a moment.
Sure.
James, there you are. And over there on my right, you're going to see Dan Gormanski. Dan, there you are right over there. Gentlemen, it's great to see you guys. For once, I'm the host of the interview, and I'm coming to see you guys down in Florida. How you guys doing tonight?
Great.
That's awesome. Daniel?
He's doing great. He's doing great as well.
Daniel is having some connection issues, but that's okay. We're gonna grin and bear it through his connection issues. I still wanted you here more than anything, Dan. So just your presence is making the show for me, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. The reason I really wanted Dan and James here today is not only are there some of my dearest friends in the gaming community, you guys have seen me pull up people like Jim Ward, Luke Gygax, Darlene, people of that ilk. But even though these people are so important to the history of the game, James and Dan are very much what's happening now, right now in the game industry, especially with regard to first edition. James and Dan are running a very successful convention down in Florida. Consequently, they're helping keep the lights of the torches of first edition burning. And as a result, I wanted to talk to them a little bit about their experiences, about how they came into the game, and what's going on with them and creating your own convention and things like that, so you can actually translate your passions for the game into something that maybe you wouldn't even imagine that can touch hundreds and thousands of people out there, their lives. But before I do that, I want to give these guys a chance to introduce themselves to you. James, why don't we start over here with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself for the people out there who don't know you very well.
All right. Well, again, thank you for having us on, Carlos. I'm James. I'm part of the duo. Dan and I host GrogTalk, which we do usually live streaming on Saturdays. You also find us on a podcast. And we started about a year ago with an idea of using it as a vehicle to promote GrogCon, which is a convention that we have in October. It's in the Orlando area. And we had our first convention last October. And we worked with some folks with the Crucible convention down here, which was focused on miniatures and wargaming. And we focused on old school gaming, primarily first edition. And we were very fortunate to have Carlos as one of our host all-star DMs. And he also wrote the official module for it. That was a fan selected. We came up with a contest, and he wrote an extensive module with a great backstory, and he actually ran it there. So this year's year 2, and so we're super excited. And I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for almost 40 years, and started when in just preteen, and I've played a number of different series. Kind of left the hobby in the late 80s and started up a few years ago, and that's how I ran into Dan. He was running an event here in Orlando, and we started becoming friends, and that's how it started about 2 years ago. So that's my story.
That's awesome. Before we get to Dan, we've got some Greyhawk All-Stars right now watching the show live right now. One of my great supporters and dear friends, Gitano, is out there. Hey, Gitano, how you doing? But we've also got Anna Meyer and Jason Zavoda out there. Anna Meyer, you guys might know from her wonderful Greyhawk maps, professional cartographer for Cobalt Press. Jason Zavoda is out there. Jason wrote, probably in my opinion, what's the most indispensable Greyhawk document in the last 20 years, which is the Encyclopedia Greyhawkana, through which you can actually cross-reference and find information about the Floness right at your fingertips. So welcome, guys, and thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you guys supporting myself and Dan and James. Now, Daniel, I don't know how you're going to hold up here connection-wise, so why don't you tell us your story?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Carlos.
Speak.
So, so I played AD&D back in the early 80s, and I took almost about 30 years off, and out of the blue decided to see if there was any first edition gaming going on. And a friend of mine did a quick Google search and discovered Gary Con. And so I went to Gary Con, and I loved it, and I figured that the only way to be able to play first edition D&D again would be to travel to Lake Geneva once a year. But I decided to try to start a group here locally in the Orlando area, and I started a meetup group. And the very first game that I ran, we had about 9 players, I think. And yeah, it was great. It was amazing. Very fortunate. And the rest is kind of history. So we've had this AD&D group. We've had multiple groups. James runs a campaign as part of that group. And we've been doing that for about 3 years. And then we decided to try to have a first edition old school convention, GrogCon. And we're very fortunate to kick it off this past year and have people like you come and support it.
Oh man, thank you so much, James. Dan just mentioned a 9-person table. Your tables are legendary for having multiple players. Could you what about how big is your table right now?
Well, it's actually down to 8.
Okay.
We started a new campaign. We kind of like what Dan does with cats. He shelters them. We shelter wayward D&D players. We have an open table. We use Meetup. We have over 300 members, about 60 active members. And so Dan's been doing one-shots of classic modules from the 70s and 80s. I'm kind of running a recurring campaign. And we've had up to my last chapter of the campaign, we had 12 or 13 at a time running. So that's a lot.
Yeah,
and,
that is a real lot. And as a matter of fact, I was going to mention that one of the ways I met you guys, it's a 6 degrees of separation kind of thing, because much like Dan, my thing was, you know what, I got to go to Mecca. I've got to go to see Gary. I got to go to GaryCon and play the games over there. And one of my good friends in the Greyhawk community is Alan Growy. If anybody out there knows Alan, you know what a Greyhawk scholar he is. And he's a guy I really respect, not only for his knowledge about Greyhawk, but I just respect him as a human being, because I think he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in our community. So I really wanted to play in his game. But what I did was, so I went to GaryCon and I got to play in his game, and it inspired me to make my own game, write my own game. And when I came back the second time, I ran a game that ended up having a 12-person table, including Luke Gygax. So yeah, that was my trial by fire for GaryCon, and I've been going ever since. That kind of was where Castle Entertainment was born, because I thought to myself, you know what, Luke Gygax is going to be there. I better show up large and actually have something printed to give him nice. And yeah, the next thing I knew, I was publishing books. And that is where I met Dan Gormanski the next year. Dan, you were a player, you and Edward Dandro, another awesome player, great DM, good friend of mine from Central Florida. You guys showed up at GaryCon the second year I was, or probably the third year I was there actually, but the second year I was actually DMing stuff, and you played in my Marquesa game. And
yes,
I still remember where you were. You were directly at 1 o'clock away from me. Edward was about 12 o'clock ahead of me, and you played the first time you played the cleric, the cleric half orc of Luthik, who actually was the character that Luke Gygax played.
Yeah, your memory's like, you remind me of Ed Greenwood. You like remember everything. So
well, actually, I even remember what Dan played. Dan played Jaron Brax, the Ranger.
Yeah, when I remember when I showed up the following year to Carlos's game, Carlos said, "Now, if you've played a character before, you can play them again." And he announced to me, I think, what character I'd had. I had no recollection, but you did. You remember, and I believe that was when you could still, I guess, get into Carlos's games with a silver badge. I think that those days are gone.
They are, because right now. To be honest with you, I just looked at the at GaryCon's pay, or the tabletop event site. I've got one table or one seat for every one of my games left, and I think that's kind of a fluke more than anything. Everything else filled up with diamond, platinum, and gold badges. But I'm really glad you brought that up, Dan, is because people who play in my games at GaryCon don't feel. And you're watching the show right now, and you're thinking to yourself, "Oh man, what a bummer! I'm not going to be able to play in one of Carlos's games." Well, I want you guys to know I am so humbled and so gratified that people want to play with me at all. I run a million off-schedule games. And I do that for the explicit reason so people have a chance to play with me. I want to expose new people to Castle Entertainment, don't get me wrong, but it's really important for me to get a chance to play with my friends and the people who have supported me all along. So don't feel like you don't have a chance of playing a game with me. Reach out to me so I can schedule you in for one of these off-site games that are held in the convention center, and we will throw dice together. Okay, so now that you guys have introduced yourselves a little bit, I want to get a chance to talk about a couple other things. Dan and James, as I mentioned before, run the GrogCon down over in Central Florida. But one of the things that actually supports GrogCon, you'll see a graphic at the bottom of the screen right now. Hey, Lord Gasamba, thanks so much for rating into us, and we really appreciate it. You'll notice at the bottom of my screen right now, there's a link to the GrogTalk's Patreon. This directly supports their ability to run the show and to come up with swag and to promote and things like that. They run the show, it's in conjunction with their YouTube show, which is extremely successful. It's what I enjoy watching as often as I can. I love being on it as often as I can. So if you guys have a chance to support that show, their Patreon, please, by all means, do. I mean, the guys really deserve it.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. Yeah, and as Dan likes to say, if you're going to support one patron, support Castle Entertainment. If you're going to support two, you could support us. And we do this as a labor of love. We use this to support the show and also our efforts to keep the 1E flame going. I mean, really, all our episodes are, in fact, we had a nice comment on the YouTube channel saying, so there's such a dearth of 1E content that's current and that people are showing the game continuing forward. So we're very humbled by that. We have a contest right now, which I can quickly show.
Yeah, absolutely, by all means.
Dear friend Vic Dorso has made a 3D model of the deities and demigods bridge/temple where I'll do that shameless plug at the same time. And we're giving this away to if you're a patron of any level if you become a patron by February 29th, leap year day, we're going to give this away in March. So if you're at any level, you have a chance to win this. And we have contests and other things.
Jay Scott out there right now is watching us, Lord Gasamba, and he runs a magnificent, as does Nightheart Gaming out there, now that I think about it. You guys both run magnificent Twitch streams about Greyhawk and you use a lot of heavy miniatures. That would look really good in your collection, I must say.
Yeah, very cool.
Just to throw that out there a little bit. Talk to me a little bit about your podcast before we move on to the actual the meat and drink here of the show. We'll start over here with Dan a little. I want to get your thoughts about this a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what people can expect from the podcast, why you guys started it, when you started it.
Sure. So it was James's idea. So when we decided to do GrogCon, James felt that if we did a podcast, that the podcast would help generate interest in the convention. So that's really what it was designed to be. And I remember saying I did not listen to podcasts at all. I still don't listen to a lot of podcasts. But so if I was going to do a podcast, I figured, well, I should listen to some. And I listened to a few. And I remember saying to James, and I'm sure James will remember this, I said, look, if we're going to do a podcast, but we need to make sure, because what I really don't like are these podcasts that are really long. They're just jibber jabbering about a bunch of stuff like, oh, I was at this convention, I met so-and-so. I want it to be like surprise in D&D, half an hour, you learn the rules of surprise. Right. And if you listen to our first podcast, it is very much, it did go a bit long, but it was rolling up a character, but it was
2 hours.
It's 2 hours. The first was 2 hours?
But we rolled dice within the first 5 minutes. So that we were stuck, we didn't jibber jabber at all. So we were very good. Right.
And and I will let James talk perhaps about how it's changed. So it started as just intending to be very informational. How to roll up a character, how to do combat, and it's changed, and I'll let James talk about how it's changed.
Yeah, but by the same token, before James takes over, it is still very informational. I find out you guys do a lot of cool stuff with the show about information. But go ahead with go ahead, James.
Yeah, I think we wrote, like I'm sure you do, anyone who does this, contrary, if you watch us, we do have a script. We somewhat follow it. We do an outline. And so we listed all the things we wanted to talk about. And I think the first episodes were focused on the mechanics because, a lot of at least what we've seen in our local gaming shops, and the fact that you have to travel pretty far to play a 1E game if you're not fortunate to have one or host one is, it's almost ancient history. It's what OD&D was 20 years ago. Like, we heard of people playing it, but we don't know anyone who actually does. And so we had to assume that people had no idea how to run it. So the first few 10 or 15 were really focused on how to play it, rules as written, when to, what were rulings, what were home rules. But over time, people wanted, we first focused, we recorded it locally and then published it on YouTube. Right. And as you know, as a person who has many hats, that takes a lot of time to publish it. Dan is the talent. I'm here to just kind of be his sounding board. He shows up, he does his thing, and then he leaves. And then I have to put all the videos. So I said, I'm tired of this. I'm just going to do a live stream and then download the audio and cut it up for podcasting. Because audio, you can manipulate. It's not too bad. Fast forward, people started actually watching it. I really was just the intent just to record it. Right. And leave it up there for posterity. And we started getting people from all around the world. I'm similar to you, Japan and Australia and Germany. And so we built a community of folks who want to. So, it doesn't lend itself to brevity. I'll just say it that way.
No. Talking about Dan and his contribution to the show, Dan has you have a ton of charisma on the show. Just so you know, I know your last show was all about charisma, so this is topical, all right? And this is not to get all filter of love on you or anything like that, but
or rod of beguiling.
I know about the filter of love.
I was in the crowd, as you guys know, out in the chat room when you guys were talking about those items. That rod of beguiling is so disgustingly overpowered. That is one of those items that nobody ever really looks at what it actually does, and it's sick. That thing it should be an artifact. There's a reason why Frazer Blue carries one. But going back to your show and everything like that, the podcast being an arm of the show, I think is very important. I think it's good to get the reach out. Much like you guys, caslTawk here, basically, I thought about caslTawk. I conceived it as a way of advertising basically for Castle Entertainment. Just another kind of a thing that we could do that would get our name out there so people would be like, oh, cool. If they don't like to watch live games, maybe they'll like to watch interviews or whatever. But much like your experience, I found that as I went forward, it shifted into something else, And I want to talk, just so to your point, out there in the crowd, I'm getting a lot of chat right now. My friend Gaetano over here says, yeah, Dan and James make it very analytical and practical in the approach to the topics that they focus on for the podcast. So what you guys are doing, people are touching and feeling it, and they're actually seeing it. And Chantel mentions, I don't think Carlos has more than one hat. It's always the same beanie. You know what? Actually, Chantel, I actually have two of these. This hat is a prototype for the Castle Entertainment beanie that we were making. My wife got ones of them, and we've got so much going on, I haven't been able to work on the prototype. So, yes, there actually are two beanies in existence. So,
awesome.
It doesn't get that dirty, believe me.
We need to do a GrogCon 20 beanie. That's on the merch. That's got to be on the merch. Not,
I can't believe it. Has anybody been on the GaryCon page today?
No.
Luke Gygax is giving away this beanie, a GaryCon beanie. It's a one-of-a-kind beanie. And there's like 4 people in there saying, I think Carlos Lising should have it. I just woke up and I turned it on. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the most awesome thing ever. So if I actually get that thing somehow, I'll be, I believe I'll be touched to
Well,
say.
we've got to make that. I'm sure it's not going to sell too great here in Florida, but there's always a handful of people who wear it. So
Yeah, I do it because my hair is so long. It just keeps everything out of my face, I find.
that's my problem too.
Yeah,
It's
clearly, clearly. Well, a lot of people thought I was bald, actually, and
yeah,
that's why I do it. But if you actually look at it, I've got hair down the middle of my back, really.
yeah.
um, so we talked about the Patreon. We talked about your beginning. I want to briefly mention the Greyhawk Hex Crawl. Going back to your show and what you guys do. Uh, James, we'll go ahead and we'll start with you this time. Could you tell us a little bit about your idea for the Greyhawk Hex Crawl, what it's about, why you guys are doing it, and why people want to tune in to watch it?
Sure. So Dan is like a broken clock. He's right twice a day, and he throws a lot of ideas, and most of them I try to poo-poo, but I humor him because he's a good friend of mine, and he's like, "We need to go back to 1980." That was his idea for 2020. This is the 40th year anniversary, and so he started coming up with ideas, and one of his ideas was, "Hey, that's when the first Greyhawk pamphlet, the Gazetteer, came out, 1980, and we need to celebrate it by doing a hex crawl." First, I thought, okay, we'll just look at the map. No, that's not good enough. We're going to do a hex crawl. So he said, let's do that. We're also looking at Dragon Magazine and White Dwarf from the time. And part of it is, and I'm let Dan kind of expand on it, is I was ignorant of White Dwarf when I grew up. I didn't have access to it. Then we disappeared for 30 years, so I didn't have a whole lot of knowledge of it. So me, it's kind of reliving the past. I think for Greyhawk, that's kind of what Dan wanted to accomplish out of the hex crawl. Is that right, Dan?
Yeah, so one of the things I think why James and I make a good team is that I remember very little. I mean, so many of the rules James often jokes about. Everything's new to you, isn't it? James has a lot of knowledge of the rules and of Greyhawk. He's really our institutional knowledge. Whereas for me, I don't know a lot of the rules very well. I really, having picked up after 30 years, I'm learning a lot of this stuff. And that's true of Greyhawk as well. So, we used Greyhawk back in the day, but I don't remember it very well. And so I thought this would be, to do a hex crawl, I thought would be a good opportunity for me to actually learn about Greyhawk. And so, the point is not simply to do adventures, but as you do the adventures and you go to each hex, to learn a little bit about the history of the hex and the history of Greyhawk.
Right. Now, if you guys go to the GrogCon or GrogTalk, excuse me, YouTube channel, you will see these hex crawls that they've done. They're archived there. They're a lot of fun to watch. You've got various DMs like myself, Victor Dorso, Brian recently. These guys. We're all contributing something different to it. And being that this game in particular, or this chat in particular, and what Castle Entertainment does is very geared towards Greyhawk, I think you guys would really enjoy it. I had a lot of fun. We started in the city of we started over in the city of Safeton and on the Wild Coast, and I created a bunch of NPCs for them. We got a chance to touch and feel Greyhawk history in the Wild Coast region, and I think I am scheduled to go next week, or is it the week after?
20, it'll be the 29th because we're
Oh,
having Alan Hammock on the same time. So it's
that's
going to
right.
be another 7-hour podcast.
Well,
So
I'll make sure that my part's only at least an hour, but I will do I'm gonna be there on the 29th, picking up the hex scroll again. So if you want to
perfect.
see me how I treat with actually what is one of my favorite areas in the Flyness, which is the cold north, uh, absolutely tune in for that because these guys are great players as well as great DMs and show promoters, and they have a lot of fun. The charisma and the joy of the game, which is something I think we miss a lot of times. We play D&D because we love it. We love.
Yeah.
We have that childlike wonder at the whole experience, the game, the way it just takes you to a totally new place. And Dan and James, one of the things I really enjoyed about DMing you guys is that I could touch and feel that with in the show. I mean, I could see it on your faces. You could just feel the whole vibe of it was you guys are very you guys have a lot of fun with it, and I think sometimes we miss the fun part of it in our quest to make cool stories or cool products or whatever. So
Well,
Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
I think that's one of the reasons why the podcasts have grown so long. I mean, I genuinely enjoy heading over to James's house, aka the GrogTalk studio, and just sitting around and talking about first edition, which I think what we do a lot. We just so we do go off script a lot. I think we're not making apologies for that anymore because it is what it is, and we have a fun time talking about first edition.
one of my viewers just said that I have special beaties and they keep everyone from being able to read my thoughts, or they keep the many voices in my head from escaping. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Hey, Lamashtu, it's good to see you, man. Bring back. He wants me to bring back the Expedition to Black Ice or kill him. It's on the list, believe me. So going back to the main topic of this conversation, because see, you guys, I always have so much fun with you. I get sidetracked pretty easily. I'm going to take everybody back to the year 1968. Okay, this is 2 years before I was born, so I'm non-existent at this point. But 68 is a very important year for our hobby, and the reason being is because that was the year that Gary Gygax actually kicked off the era of the Modern Games Convention with Gen Con 1. At that point in time, we're pre-Dungeons and Dragons. It's a wargaming thing. He's got people coming in from Minneapolis and local gamers that he's been playing with. They're doing a lot of the Avalon Hill stuff there. It's one of those situations where from tiny acorns, mighty oaks do grow, because he, I think by the end of his life, obviously he was out of touch with Gen Con because of what ended up happening with TSR. But I don't think in his wildest dreams he could have imagined that it would one day grow into being an event attended by 70,000 people from around the world, and they were very nearly 70,000 this year.
Mm.
With like events and his event, if Helen of Troy was the face that launched 1,000 ships, then Gen Con was the convention that launched 1,000 conventions. I mean, there is no GrogCon, there is no GaryCon without Gen Con. And I think that what you guys are doing is a total callback to that. I think that it's something that is a vital, especially for 1E, where the reach that we have right now. You guys mentioned kind of tangentially that it was kind of dwindling a little bit for a while. The convention scene is so important to keep it alive and viable, and I think that you guys do an awesome job with that. And we're going to talk your convention hardcore here in a second. But again, this is a World of Greyhawk chat a little bit, so I want to talk about a little bit of Greyhawk. James, let's start with you about this. Tell me about your introduction to Greyhawk, your thoughts on the setting, things like that. Your favorite places in there?
Sure. Well, for me, it starts. I started playing in '82,
Mm-hmm.
and I grew up in New York City. But in summers, I would come down here, and my friends that lived near where I was staying at my grandmother's house. Summertime, you got nothing to do. They pulled out this odd game, and we started playing it. It just captured my imagination. We bicycled down to the bookstore, and it was they had one rack, not even a full bookshelf. Those circular racks that would spin around. They had the D&D books there, and I still remember trying to save enough money to buy one of the modules, and eventually I bought the Player's Handbook there, and still have for those who are looking, the original Player's Handbook with still where I stapled the thing on it.
That's awesome.
From Florida, brought it back and forth. And so it really wasn't until I got back up to New York that I started acquiring the TSR modules, and started with the A series, and in particular A2 and A3 were the first two modules that I got. And I have them in my A3. I know, Dan, I've showed this a number of times, and it's literally falling apart, and I've taped it, and so it's falling apart here. And this was kind of when I went with my mother places, we'd read this, and it would talk about where it was in the World of Greyhawk. I'm like, what does that mean? If you're using the World of Greyhawk, it would say, it would be located here, off the Wild Coast near the Dragon's and all these things. So in 1983, I purchased the 83 version of Greyhawk, and I had the maps up. And in fact, I have 2 copies. The one copy still has the take marks where I put them up on my, wall and would just stare at them. And so, Greyhawk was the default setting. There and it really, we've talked about this on our show. If it wasn't TSR and it wasn't Greyhawk, it really wasn't D&D. And I was kind of a teenage snob. It's like, oh, that's not rock, that's jazz, I don't like it, or something to that effect. I really became a purist. So Greyhawk is first edition D&D from my perspective. I know Forgotten Realms came out later, and obviously Ed's and his work is amazing, but Greyhawk is, and so a lot of our campaigns were based on it, and just it made these modules real because they had a tie into a world that was Gary's, even though it was a work of many folks. And so when I disappeared from the hobby and came back, and my sons, and I think that's where the Renaissance is coming from. We now have children who are getting old enough where they want to play. We started with Cult of the Reptile God and Outside of Hohawk and that part of the world, and started leveraging and instantiating the version. Now 40 years gone by, there's so much lore that's canon,
right?
And we've talked about this. Hopefully we can talk about this. It's almost it's very challenging if you know one version of it. Fortunately there's such luminaries who keep it, but that's how I fell in love with it.
As a harbinger of what's to come in that part of the conversation, I think one thing it's important to remember about Greyhawk is the design aesthetic between it and Forgotten Realms is so different, because with Greyhawk, you're talking about these wide open areas that are meant to be developed by the DM and the players, whereas Forgotten Realms, you're detailing every blade of grass. You're really going down to the minutia with that, which leads to different kinds of play, with in each setting. To me, I think a lot of people that say that they're very similar don't understand that portion of it. That the way that the design aesthetic, it directly affects the way that the games are played inside of those settings. And James, some of our viewers that just listened to you speak just now, I've got Phantom New Jersey says, I'm with you, James. And another person over here, I've got somebody mentions Forgotten. This is Jason Zavoda, my good friend, says Forgotten Realms is a tonal jazz to me. Well, Jason, just so you know how it is to me, I break this out every once in a while. This is my mini that I have, one of my dragon minis, okay, that I have. This is Icing Death from the old 3rd edition Forgotten Realms thing. If you look really close here, who does he have in his mouth right now when I actually keep it up on my screen? Oh, that's Drizzt Warden. Oh, okay. Sorry to hear that. That's how I feel about Forgotten Realms.
It's just a separate thing, and it when and I have a deep affection for the Gold Box series because I had stopped playing and it was my only exposure to D&D, and really we thought at the time that computer games was going to replace D&D. It was just going to get better and better, and ignorance and being young, right. I got into gaming, video gaming more than that. And with our friends breaking away, that's what became the thing. And so Forgotten Realms was, the default for gaming. And so I attribute Forgotten Realms to gaming, not 2nd edition, because I didn't play 2nd edition, or much of 1st edition.
I could see how that could happen very easily. Dan, tell us about Greyhawk for you, and why you love it, and your background with it, and your feelings about the setting. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
Sure. So I absolutely love maps. And, I, like many of us, I had read Lord of the Rings and was a huge Lord of the Rings fan before discovering D&D. And I loved the maps in the books. And so what I recall of Greyhawk is we didn't use a lot of Greyhawk's history, but I remember the map. And what I loved about the map was just looking at it and wondering what's in that forest. I mean, I like the way you described how there's a lot of spaces to be filled in Greyhawk, leaving it to the DM's imagination. That's what I really liked. I mean, so the booklet that comes with it, in all honesty, is less interesting to me than the map itself. What I would be excited about is just give me the map, and let's create an adventure with this map anew. But so that's what it meant to me. Was it showed me just the map. It showed me that D&D could be more than just a dungeon crawl, one after another with no connection. It reminded me and taught me that D&D really could be like Lord. If that's the type of campaign, not everyone wants to run that type of campaign, but it really could be the epic campaign like Lord of the Rings. And I remember we bought there was I think battle system or something where you could have large battles and all that. And me and Edward bought that. That's how Greyhawk appealed to me. Was showing that it could be much more than just dungeon crawl after dungeon crawl.
Two things about your thoughts on that, Dan, that I'd like to address. The first thing is, just a couple weeks ago on Lord Gasumba's channel, Jay Scott, hey Jay out there, Jay, for those of you who are out there who don't know about his Twitch show, amazing. He does a lot of, much like myself, he does games and he does chat shows. He did something about how, different takes on the World of Greyhawk. So your thing that you mentioned just over there fits right into that whole thing where you just pick up the map and you kind of don't tie it into history. You just make your own whatever out of the whole cloth of the map. So that I think that was pretty cool. That's kind of like a parallel thought process there. But the other thing I want to mention is, have you ever seen Anna Meyer's maps, her Greyhawk maps?
No, the only Greyhawk map I think I've seen is the Greyhawk map, which was Darlene, right?
Anna Meyer, our good friend and who is out there in the show right now, who's in the audience right now. Anna's a professional cartographer for Cobalt Press, and she does a lot of personal projects in the World of Greyhawk. She has released several maps that are updated and digital versions, super ultra high res versions of the World of Greyhawk. And for those of you like Daniel out there who haven't had a chance to see Anna's work, again, much like I mentioned about Jason Zavoda's Encyclopedia Greyhawkana, this is an indispensable document for Greyhawk. And Dan, I'll get you some links after this so you can educate yourself on those maps, because it will revolutionize your thoughts on the setting. I'm quite sure. So
good. Thank you. Can't wait. Thank you.
Hey, no problem, man. That's one of the reasons why we do this. I love the setting, and I love exposing new people to it, and just doing deep delves in it. James, what are your favorite locations and your favorite modules besides A2, A3 set in the World of Greyhawk?
Probably besides A2 and A3, the S3, which is in the mountain peaks, and expedition. I've run recently. Last year we ran L1, Lenore Isles, that whole campaign area on the east side. Those are probably my top three. To me, the whole Slavers and the Wild Coast and that whole area, and then later they obviously tied Hamlet with Temple of Elemental Evil into the Slavers, into the Giants. If you wanted the full campaign, you could go from really zero to extra planner combat with Loth if you dared an almost steampunk there. So I'd say those are my top three. Tomb of Horrors, while it has a place in Greyhawk, it just seemed timeless. You could see that anywhere.
Right.
So it didn't feel as tied in to the geography that, so for instance, like Lenore Isles or the Wild Coast for the Slavers.
Yeah. I find Barrier Peaks to be a very divisive module among the fandom. Either people seem to really like it or they seem to hate it. I'm one of the rare people that I'm kind of in between on it. I think it's got a lot of really cool ideas, and I do enjoy it. I don't know that I would employ it a lot very often though. I mean, it's one of those things that's very special for me. And you mentioned L1. Actually, I really love L2, which is Assassin's Knot. That's what the
Yeah.
sequel to it's one of my all-time favorites. I think that's a beautifully written module, and it was one of the templates for me actually when I was writing my second gnome adventure, which was who uh, who sits upon the oaken throne. I thought that was just the way it was written, the formatting. It's very different than most first edition modules, and I thought I really enjoyed just the way that Len Lakofka kind of presented the material. I thought it was really cool. Dan, how about
Yeah.
you? Your favorite locations, your favorite modules?
Well, so my favorite location, you have to remember, I'm coming back to Greyhawk after 30 years, and we didn't use it that much back in the day. So my knowledge of locations is based upon the current Greyhawk hex crawls, which would be, it's got to be the Wild Coast, because that's really all I know of so far is the Wild Coast. But you'd be proud of me, Carlos. So I'm running Ghost Tower.
Okay,
And
cool.
right, and you had mentioned in the hex crawl on the Wild Coast,
I did.
the Ghost Town of Inverness is in the area, and so I started doing some research. So you're having an influence. I guess you would say, think a positive influence on me. So I said, all right, so let me find out where exactly. Let me pull out my map. Where is the Ghost Tower located? And then I said, well, okay, what pre-gens am I going to use for this? And I like to have interesting, I mean, everyone does, obviously, but I want to have some interesting pre-gens, not just your typical, ones that you'd use in the tournament. And so I said, well, how about making them slavers? Because my understanding from talking to Carlos is, the slavers, the A series was in that woolly bay, right? They would raid the Wild Coast. And so I think I'm going to have them be slavers trying to find the soul gem to keep it from the Duke, who is trying to get it. So currently, yes, I would say only because that's the only area I'm familiar with. It would be the Wild Coast and the Woolly Bay.
Right. The slavers themselves were actually a little bit south of that in the Pomarge, but they did raid up and down the Wild Coast after the Pomarge was overrun, as I mentioned in that thing. And yeah, that area. Remember, there's a reason why Gary Gygax made Mordenkainen from the Wild, or is thought to be from the Wild Coast. Gary was actually very fond of the Wild Coast himself. So was Rob Kuntz, because not long ago, Paul Stormberg, I remember, ran an auction on his amazing Adventure Trove site, and it was all Rob Kuntz's personal notes, and they were all about the Wild Coast, all handwritten drawn maps and everything. It was just troop counts. It was just an amazing, amazing historical document. I'm sure it cost someone an absolute mint. I'm going to go back right now to the chat a little bit and to talk about some of the things, because Dan, when you were talking earlier about Greyhawk and its aesthetic, Anna Meyer was like, great to hear, Dan. Greta Wolf Slayer, my friend Gaetano, preach it, brother Dan. So everybody's pretty much agreeing with you about your thoughts on it. Make it your own. And I'm seeing that, let's see, somebody else over here is backing my thoughts on Anna Meyer's Patreon and her maps.
Yeah, I went on it while it's the you have an online version. Wow, it's crazy. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is really crazy.
Yeah.
And everybody's talking about Anna's Patreon over here. I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. I'm a member myself. It's one of the Patreons, much like GrogCon's Patreon. I actually back it. I think it's important to support the remainder of the community, with your money. So I make sure that Anna definitely earns my money every month. She does such great work coming out of there. Best patron ever. Some of the people are talking about some of their first experiences over here with D&D and Greyhawk. Somebody mentions B1 with Holmes Basic, which is I think that's formative for so many people out there. Anna, you're making me blush here. You earned it. You earned it. You earned it. And I did say Leonard Lakofka. I did. So, yeah, a lot of people are touching and feeling the same things that we do about the setting and have some of the same formative experiences, which is super cool. Okay, so we've established Greyhawk. And by the way, I'm a little bit disappointed that none of you guys mentioned the Baron, the Dry Steppes is one of your favorites of locations in the World of Greyhawk. Being that there was a module set in there called the
yeah.
Porcelain Sword of Queen Ashala or something like
Yes,
that.
that's true. You're exactly right. That's I was set up for that. I was actually thinking. I was going to ask you. Um, Back in the day, was there a or since I'm sure someone's written one. The Scarlet Brotherhood was always the thing that was like lawful evil monks and their whole area that they have.
Right.
What and you know and obviously one of the Brother Marmato from A3 was from there. But did modules come out of there? Again, going
They're
from the
the only
deep
two
freeze.
modules that have ever been written, or products that have ever been written specifically about the Scarlet Brotherhood, are the supplement itself called Scarlet Brotherhood, which was done in second edition. It was written by Sean Reynolds, and it's very comprehensive about the whole Tilvanot Peninsula and what you can expect on there, and what kind of adventures you can have over there. But it also touches on the Amedio jungle quite a bit, which is the first real before something like Savage Tide came out from Paizo. This was the first chance you ever really got to see stuff about the Amedio. So it's a cool document in that regard. But the biggest module that's ever been written on it is actually a chapter in Fate of Istis, which is WG8, which has a map of Hisul Ashar, and it discusses an invasion of it in Fate of Istis. Even though Istis is my favorite Greyhawk god, that module lets me down in so many ways because I think the maps of the cities are really lacking in there, and in a lot of ways they're contradictory to what to canon material. I don't think the research was great necessarily when they made that, but I also think that Fate of Istis, it was self-serving in a way, because what it did was it introduced the whole lack of monks and assassins in second edition. Through the plot line, the player character's machinations eliminate all monks and assassins in the World of Greyhawk.
Gotcha.
It's not. Yeah, I'm not real keen on that.
Well, that sounds like a good module opportunity then, because that always was enamoring. We kind of think of David Carradine rightly or wrongly, but now you have these sadistic stormtroopers meet the evil empire meets kung fu is simplifying it would be super cool.
No, you're absolutely right. And in my particular case, my take on the monk and its place in the World of Greyhawk is not only are the Scarlet Brotherhood have there, but there's a very large monastic tradition, for me at least, in the Baclunish states to the northwest on the Flanaess. And you guys got a chance to see that in Queen Ashala, where there was everyone's got that kind of a feel to it, and because of their natures, the two of them are very antithetical to one another. So, and I think the fact that you have Baclunish gods out there like Zuokin and Zanier out there who are explicitly monkish gods, I think that kind of ties in really nicely to that notion. We've talked a little bit about Greyhawk. We've talked a little bit about first edition. I want to get to GrogCon now, and I want to talk about the whole convention experience. You guys are not only enthusiastic RPG convention attendees, as I mentioned in Dan's case. That's where he and I met, but you also obviously run an event of your own, which is GrogCon. You guys, because of that, you guys have, you could talk a little with some authority about, what it's the whole convention experience and how it differs from campaign and what it's like creating your own thing. Tell me a little bit about how and why you arrived at the decision to start a convention.
Well, I'll let Dan finish it, but because we're naive and stupid, we thought it would be easy and thought it'd be fun. And we said, well, how hard could it be? I mean, right? We'll just get a room and I think it really started. We did a summer tournament, and I'm using open air quotes, for our meetup. And it was pretty successful. And we thought, but we didn't get the buy-in. We got some people to show up and we got to tables, and I think people appreciated it, but it didn't have a convention feel. It was kind of just, basically an extended session. We said, why can't we we weren't trying to shoot for a Gary Con or a North Texas or Gamehole, but we should be able to draw in Florida, an old school convention. And so that's how we started. And then fortunately, Dan started doing some research and working. I'll let him take over. So we basically said, let's do a convention, and we started planning it. And then fortunately, I think Dan was kind of nodding his head and in the background coming up with a way to make this happen.
Yeah, well, and we really need to do a shout out to Craig Russell from the Crucible convention, because I think we're very fortunate. A convention seemed like a cool idea, but I think unless Craig Russell from Crucible had approached us and asked if we would be willing to have GrogCon be part of the Crucible convention, which is an annual convention down here in the Orlando area, which focuses on miniature wargaming, I don't think that, there's a good chance GrogCon wouldn't have happened. But Craig Russell wanted to expand Crucible into role-playing games. He'd already had some 5th edition, but I was on I think I was on one of these 1st edition Facebook pages, and for some reason we started communicating about, GrogCon, and he invited James and I to meet him and to talk about making it part of Crucible. And I think that was, for us, that was a game changer, because what that did is it took, we've only had GrogCon 1 year, but what it did was it took GrogCon from simply being, at your local friendly gaming store to now being part of a legitimate convention at a hotel. You've got rooms and, you've got food. And so that really, I think, hooking up with Crucible and Craig Russell helping us out, because then we didn't have to worry about expenses and things like that. And, we're on tabletop. And so, it has, it is a real convention, but also has the feel of a convention when you're on tabletop. And so it was, I agree with James, though, that, we kind of were like, hey, how hard can it be? It was very stressful, because, I think one of the things that we learned, understandably, is that, unlike GaryCon, where people are immediately going to sign up for games because they know it's popular, and now, once you get that ball rolling, if you don't sign up for your games on the first day, you're not, you're out a lot of games, and there's this momentum. Well, when you're running a convention for the first time, a lot of people might decide whether they're going to come or not 2 weeks before the convention, but that makes it very stressful because you don't know how many people are going to show up. So, I think both James and I were kind of, nervous right up until the end, because we didn't know how, we had people like you coming in, and you were so nice to agree to come, to take a leap of faith with a new convention that you had absolutely no idea what to expect. And you and Amanda came down, and Vic Dorso came down, and we appreciate that so much. But at the same time, I think, I don't know, James, how you felt about it. It made me nervous knowing that, you got people that were investing their time and their effort and their money to come, and we had no idea how many people were going to show up. But in the end, I honestly thought it was fantastic. I'm not just saying that because, we put it on, because the people that come to the convention, what makes the convention really, it's not, it's everybody. And ultimately, people came, and I just thought of it. Honestly, it was probably the most fun I've had at a convention ever. So, not that I've been to a ton, but I thought it was a blast.
Now, for me, I want to mention, first of all, you guys talk. There's a lot to unpack there. For me, I want to go back to Craig Russell for just a second, because I got the chance. I didn't know Craig at all until I was introduced to him at GrogCon, and if anybody out there has a chance to meet Craig, or you're in the area over there for GrogCon in Central Florida, even if you're not a war gamer, supporting Craig is supporting a really good guy. That's a really nice guy. He was very gracious of a host to Amanda and I, and obviously to GrogCon. And he is he's one of those guys out there that he makes the game better by just his presence there, because he's such a good person. And while going back to what you thought about the turnout, Amanda and I talked a little bit about before we went there what the show was going to be like, how many people we could expect there, and it crossed my mind that it might be lightly attended, but at the same time, though, Dan, just like we talked a little bit about Craig just now, I'm all about supporting good people, and you and James are such good people and such wonderful friends that I really didn't care if my games, there were two people there or whatever. I was prepared to DM for one person, solo mano y mano, and just say, hey, this is what we're going to do.
Well, you'd have two. You'd have us.
Well, yeah, but I was prepared for that because I thought to myself, you know what? Again, we talked about Gary and we talked about Gen Con. From tiny acorns, mighty oaks do grow, and your
Right.
show. I remember the very first convention I ever went to, which was a show in Ohio. I don't even remember the name of it, but it was at a small civic center in the area, and it was. This is during the heyday of D&D. This is probably around, I don't know, 83 or so, and there were less people there than at GrogCon. And
Yeah.
I'm not talking about Crucible. I'm talking about GrogCon.
Right.
So, you guys, I thought you did a dynamite job for your first year, and I expect that thing to really blow up. And I think the community is really going to back it as they get a chance to touch and feel, what it's about and see things like this episode of caslTawk. More people tune in to GrogTalk. I think the future is extremely bright for that show.
Yeah, it was super fun. We were very nervous because it was the first time we did it. We were investing patron money, we were investing our money, and we were again fortunate that we teamed up with an established convention, and he basically gave us run of our own area. We basically had tables. We could host it any way we want, so it was the best of both worlds. And so it was a great springboard. We've learned a lot from it, and so this year, it's going to be more without going crazy. I've been to some conventions where there's 400 people, like in the miniature area. There's 400 people. You can't hear anything.
Right.
Here, even the bigger room, there's a handful of tables. You can communicate well, and especially in your style where you want it to be immersive and have active dialogue. If you've got 150 tables playing at the same time, that can be problematic. So our aspiration is not to do thousands of participants. It's to have a couple hundred at some point that are passionate and really enjoyed it. And we got a chance too, because the other advantage, Craig was running around like a maniac, and we got a chance to really spend time either running games or really kind of being a host.
Right.
So that was super great too.
Yeah, I thought that getting a chance to play with the convention organizers, I played with Luke over at GaryCon before, but having a chance to play with you guys at a couple games before, that was awesome for me. It's obvious the esteem in which I hold you guys, so that for me that was a real treat.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think that going back to the chat again, one of my friends, Lamashu, I'm trying really hard not to go back and read that comment again because I think I might actually openly cry. Uh, thank you so much. That is super gratifying that you guys think that about my writing. It's very humbling. I wrote as James said, I wrote Porcelain Sword of Queen Ashala for those guys, which was named by one of the people that's in the chat room right now, Gaetano Lafavi. All he did is give me the name, and I went with from there. And I pour a lot of my passion for Greyhawk and for the game into those products. So the fact that they're being well received is really heartening to me. But yeah, just so you guys out there have a chance to see it again, right over there, I'm going to throw up the link again to the Patreon for GrogTalk. Be sure if you guys have some extra dough over there, or you guys are interested in supporting two really good guys in our community, join up. You won't be sorry that you did it. Now going ahead a little bit more with GrogCon, and it's kind of a high level discussion of it. Let's talk a little bit about the pitfalls and some of the unexpected stuff that you guys ran into when you're organizing your convention. You're let's say you were looking at somebody out here in our audience that want to run their own convention. What would be the kind of advice you would give them? What would be the watchouts that you would tell them? Things that you didn't necessarily expect that became a big deal.
Sure. Dan, why don't you go first? I'll give my notes. Because
Yeah,
I have notes from last time.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the nice thing about it is once it actually happened, I didn't feel like there were too many pitfalls. And I think that was one of the benefits of hooking up with an established convention. I suspect that if we hadn't hooked up with an established convention, we would have had a lot of pitfalls. But again, going back to, Craig Russell, the fact that he and I believe with Tim Wright were, the other co-organizer of Crucible, were doing the heavy lifting for us. So, issues with the rooms, issues with the hotel, issues, if there was a problem with somebody registering, I think, for example, Carlos, hey, I'm having trouble, registering my game, whatever. I mean, it was easy for me that I could just simply sort of email Craig Russell, sort of like having a travel agent handle your problems for you while you're traveling. So in all honesty, I mean, I think one of the strange things about it is that I didn't see too many pitfalls. I mean, I think in retrospect, the only thing that I can think of, and James may have things to add, but the only thing in retrospect is not a big deal at all, is that if you're not going to have a lot of people, try not to have a lot of overlap on the game times. And that was something that James had warned me about, and I ignored it. But I think you don't want to have too much, because you don't have that many players. If you're not a big convention, you want to make sure that everyone can get in as many games. You don't want people to there's no reason for somebody to have a 5-hour or 4-hour break when you only have about 30 gamers. So that is the only thing that I can think of.
Yeah, scheduling is important. Again, we brought in great DMs like Carlos and Vic. We want to make sure their things are filled. So coordinating, the downside of having someone run it is you have to live by their rules. And being it was the first year, there were things, since we were never we didn't know the man behind the curtain. So there were some things we learned only by going through it. Some people wanted to run a 4-hour block. Some people wanted a 5-hour. The tabletop events, as they had it set up, made it problematic. So, if you're not going to partner with a larger convention, do it at your local gaming store, or, you don't want to spend a whole bunch of money because then you're sweating, and, you've put a lot of money in, and it's just going to take an investment. So for us, having it partnered, that eliminated a lot of the risk. But as far as what we would have done better that we're hoping to do this year, again, backfill schedules based on your premium events. So if you're fortunate enough to have someone of Carlos's caliber, get his calendar done first, especially if he's writing the module for your tournament. set him up first, and any other superstar DMs, make sure they're getting filled up first before you backfill. No offense to Dan and I, but if people want to play Paranoia at Friday morning, that could wait till the end. Make sure everyone's playing those other games.
That Paranoia game was really well received, by the way. I heard a lot of good things about that throughout the show.
Well, I'll be doing it again because it's a lot. I love Paranoia. It's a fun and it's a perfect,
great game.
Perfect one shot. Organize a pickup game area. Carlos was very amenable to it, and there's times where people are kind of just congregating. We are fortunate because there's a lot of miniature gamers. They're on a tournament, they get knocked out or they've got some downtime, they want to play,
right? And
they didn't sign up for games. So either they just showed up, we had a couple people show up for events, but this is an opportunity where if we had, like for instance, Carlos is willing, hey, I got a couple hours, he pulls out one of his adventure cards that he's written and he's got a game going. So I'd like to set up some kind of area where if you're not in the game, come here and someone just says, hey, I've got this module, let's run it. And so it doesn't have to be a structured thing. To me, that would be very helpful. And if you're the hosts, make sure you're around. I mean, people want, it's not like we're super celebrities and I wouldn't even pretend to do that. But if they're coming to see us, make sure you're not running around like a chicken without a head. Make sure you host some games. I'd like to do some kind of event either before or after, just thanking people for coming. I think it's very important if you're going to run a convention and it's small, that people get to see you. And we're so like you, the comments we get from folks, this is a community, so to me that's, and pace yourself. If you're running it, basically from Thursday, our convention runs Friday morning through Sunday afternoon. For 70 hours, you're basically running hot.
Right.
You may get a few hours sleep. So if you're getting a little bit older, that may or may not be problematic. So
I know
try
a
to
little
get some
bit about
rest.
that right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because you're getting it now and preparing for GaryCon, so it's yeah, and if you've got prep work, you could spend the last 2 weeks before. So I guess that's my advice from that. But actually, the convention went perfect. Once we got going, it was awesome.
Yeah, because I before the day before the convention, and my wife will confirm this. I was saying never again.
Right.
And then at the convention, and I come home that Sunday night, and I'm basically like, I can't wait to do this again. She's like, what do you mean? I thought you were going to do it again. Like, no, I had a blast. I want to do it again. I want to start planning for next year.
It's funny you should say that. It reminds me of something I did not too long ago for one of my adventure or my patron giveaways. I wrote an adventure card with Dro as the villains in it. I looked at Amanda after I was done. I looked at her. I said, I will never create another Dro NPC ever because they're so involved and there's so many moving parts to it. And next thing I knew, I was designing one for another patron giveaway. So I know exactly where you're coming from. It's like, oh, man, that was challenging. I kind of want to try that again. um, I'm seeing some people out there in our audience right now. In particular, two individuals. I want to mention Nightheart Gaming, and I want to mention Lord Gasumba again, Jay Scott. Um, these two guys are both Frank Schumacher is Nightheart Gaming, along with Anne, who I don't know her last name, but uh, they're very miniature heavy DMs. They do a lot of terrain. They do a lot of cool stuff, and I want to tell you guys that both of you, GrogCon is the exact kind of show that I think you guys would do really well at. You'd be very well received at because there's such a huge miniature presence there because of Crucible, and you also do RPG stuff. I think that you guys would be extremely well received there, and I think it's that's something that you guys might want to look at if you have a chance to get down there. And I can vouch for the fact that you guys are going to be treated like superstars over there. So,
Yeah, let us know. And we have one of our friends that we play with. He's a huge Dwarven Forge backer, and actually Dan ran, was it Aether and the Damned with that, or what was the module that you ran?
Yeah. So what we tried, we had a Dwarven Forge setup of Janelle Jaquay's Tomb of Aether and the Damned, and so the plan is to have a Dwarven Forge game each year, and we're going to be doing the Tower of Xenopus from the Holmes Basic, the sample dungeon, this year.
You should invite Stefan Picorni to come.
Absolutely. I agree. Yes.
We're going to run into him at GaryCon, so we should talk to him.
I'm not going to be at GaryCon, so you'll have to. I have a meeting on Friday.
Oh, you're
Can you
breaking
believe
my
it?
heart.
I know, it's awful.
Our next one is, we're hoping for Game Hole in November. That's what we're going to try to go to.
Well, go to figure that you guys would mention that when I'm done with Game Hole. So that's
wait, no, stop. What are you talking about? Carlos, we were told that it could be possible that we could broadcast GrogTalk from the Game Hole, that room. You got to be there. What do you mean you got to be there?
Don't do this to me.
Why is he done? What's going on here?
No.
Breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news. I'm not really into doing Game Hole this year, and the reason being is because I'm doing GaryCon in Wisconsin, and I need to start moving to other places. I need to do a show out in the West Coast. I need to do Texas. I need to do a couple other things. So,
are you going to North Texas in June?
North Texas was a real strong possibility this year, but it looks like I think I'm going to do it next year because my project run up right now is so huge that I don't think I'll have time to prep for it properly.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
but we've
been talking about it. I mean, like I said, we were semi-invited, or it could happen. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see after this GrogCon whether Dan and I, because he's thrilled now, but a week before he's going to be cursing us for this convention.
Of course. You guys. After, again, we're talking about GrogCon. We're talking about conventions. There's a very definite difference when you're playing a game or DMing a game at a convention and when you're doing it at home in your campaign. The two experiences as both a player and a DM is very different. And that's one of the things I was very interested in talking to you guys about tonight too. You guys are veterans of the RPG convention scene. Tell us about the shows that you guys have been to, and the shows where you feel like you guys have had the best games, and why. What you think contributed to them.
Well, I'll start first because I know Dan's been to GaryCon and I have not. So I went to a number of conventions when I lived in New York when I was a teenager. And then, getting back to the hobby a few years ago, really, I haven't gone to any, only because the ones around here, they're, no offense them, but they're like Comic-Con and all these other ones. They're just this circus of tens of thousands of people, and only a small sliver is role-playing gaming. That's why Gen Con doesn't really have any interest to me, because it's this amalgamation of everything else. It's right. It's not like what I would imagine GaryCon, which is more traditional to Gen Con was. But it was, in the 80s, we would go. I lived in Queens, so it was about a 40-minute train ride to Manhattan. And, it was old school. You got broken up into teams, tournament play, and you got individually scored. And I remember, my group came in first. You had individual scoring, and then you were put into pods. And I forgot the module's name, but I still, in my dice bag, I have a handful of dice that I won at the tournament. And the other times I did horrible, and so for me, tournament play is all about, at least old school tournament play, is survivability, understanding the scoring, if it's going to be like A3, how many rooms you get through, how many you survive.
Right.
So it's balancing speed with, survivability. And resource management's less of an issue because you're just trying to plow through it.
Right.
So
and I think
that's my experience.
The scoring part is important too, because I think people would naturally think that all the scoring on TSR convention and play modules is the same. It's not. Look at the A modules and compare them, for example, to Ghost Tower of Inverness, Dan, to segue over to what you're doing right now. There's a lot of scoring that's way different in those, and it really changes the way you would play the module. To your point, Dan, what about you? What are your the conventions you've been to and you've had the best games, and why do you think it was?
Yeah, so I went to a couple local conventions back in the early 80s. I don't really remember them very well. I mean, I remember having a good time. That's about it. Mm-hmm. I've been to GaryCon 3 times, and then, of course, I've done GrogCon. I've DM'd 1 game at GaryCon. Other than that, I've been a player. So a GaryCon and a GrogCon, of course, are very different. I know GaryCon is not terribly large; it's not Gen Con, but it's in my mind, still a pretty big convention. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's pluses and minuses. I mean, the pluses are, of course, there's at a convention like GaryCon, you get to play in games with amazing DMs. I mean, what really blew me away about GaryCon was the caliber of the DMs. And so, knowing that I was DMing a group, and so what I did was I basically sort of took mental notes on what I liked and what I didn't like. I learned a lot. And as you know, I've told you this, I was blown away when I played in your game that first year. I was blown away. Now, what you were doing with the way you handled combat, how you described the blows, and how energized you were about it. And let me mention also, people talk about your handling of combat. You know what I like even better is your handling of the casting of spells, where you describe what happens with the spells, and you make it very visual. And maybe that had been happening a lot because I had been out of the game for 30 years. So maybe you were just doing what other people were doing, but I had never seen that before. And so when you did that, I was blown away. And I took what you were doing, and probably my very next game in Orlando for the group I was running, all of a sudden, I was starting to describe the combat and the blows.
How was it received by your players?
I think, I guess we'd have to ask them. I mean, I think
I was like, who are you, Carlos Lising? No.
Yeah, you'd have to ask James. I mean, James was there. I mean, I can tell you that I don't know how it was perceived, but I can tell you that when I was a player, I could compare it to other games where people were just like, okay, you roll, you hit, it's -4. And look, I understand you got to do that sometimes. It gets probably draining to do the description every single time. But contrasting between a DM that isn't doing it and a DM that is, I just found it so much more engaging. I mean, I think I came back and I can't remember. I think I must have told James and Edward that Carlos Lising's combat is the first time ever I enjoyed combat because I'm a role player. I'm the gnome illusionist thief. I want a parlay.
Right.
And it was the first time ever that I had actually enjoyed. There it is. That's me, Dan appear. Right. It's the first time I had ever enjoyed combat. But so, what I like about a GaryCon and a convention is the caliber of the DMs tends to be pretty high, and you can learn a lot and take it back with your games. What I don't like about it so much is that you are playing with people you don't know, and so that lack of familiarity sometimes makes it tough. People are a little bit, you're a little bit more reticent. And so once you're comfortable with the group and you understand everybody, you can ham it up a little bit, and so. Now, I will tell you that one of the nice things about playing at a convention, I think, is that everyone's quite serious about finishing the adventure in 4 hours. So unlike when you get around with your buddies and you spend 2 hours talking about what everyone's done for the past, couple of weeks, at a convention, you tend to hit the ground running, and people are pretty serious about wanting to finish the adventure.
Right. I'm seeing over here some in the chat right over here, my good buddy Mike Bridges from the Greyhawkery blog is mentioning that James's background is top notch. So, to James's point and what you're talking about, Dan, you just kind of touched on it yourself. As a DM that runs a lot of convention games, one of the things I notice that's different is because you know that your character does not have to see tomorrow, you let it all hang out. You're drinking all those potions. You're reading that scroll. You're expending those charges on those magic items. You are letting it all hang out right there. So I think to both your points, to me, that is the big difference, is knowing that there's no tomorrow. It makes player characters. Have you ever been one of those, had a character before, and you look at your character sheet and you've had a potion of healing or something like that for 3 levels, and you're wondering to yourself why you never drunk it? Because you were always saving it for that right occasion.
Right. It's the hoarding of it, and that's definitely a point of you smoke them while you got them.
Right.
I think going back to a little bit to Dan's point, to me, just because I grew up with the TSR modules and the tournaments I went to were all competitive.
Right.
I didn't even think of one shots. They may have had them, but I went to a tournament to play in the tournament. I went to a convention to play in a tournament. So for me, conventions and tournament play are synonymous. So it's kind of a newer phenomenon to be playing a one shot just for the purpose of playing a game and to experience different styles. So that's why we grew up with you roll the 20, you hit. It was very wargamey. We were, that's because we were trying to, most of the time, delve as deep as you could to get as many either treasure or levels and so I didn't want to hear how the sword eviscerated the thing. That's great. I want 17. I hit. How much damage? Next. Let's keep moving. We had it. And so that's a style of play that I think as I've gotten older, I've really appreciated. And thank goodness for the YouTube and all these things where you can see other styles where that role-playing, to me, role-playing was a byproduct of it. It was more, and in fact, I think that tournament play really influenced our war, making it more of a war game. So I'm so very enthusiastic now. You can do the one shot where you can ham it up and really enjoy yourself. The only thing you're doing is taking cues from the other people to make sure you're not making someone uncomfortable.
Right.
Going. I knew Ed when I was playing in your game, so I knew I could banter with him back and forth, and it wasn't going to be taken inappropriately.
Yeah, and Amanda and I were talking about that after that game. I remember we were talking about how great of a job you and Ed did as Ed and James played a brother and sister combo in my Porcelain Sword of Queen of Shala, 2 of the pre-gens. And man, just watching them go back and forth as siblings was just so much fun. It's funny that we're going to take this a little bit full circle. Now you and Dan are playing siblings in the Hex Crawl.
Right.
So I think that's pretty cool watching that banner too. Dan, it's funny you mentioned about my style as far as combat goes and spell casting. I want to explain a little bit about how that came about. Having the chance to do so. When I was a young man playing the game, my very first game. Actually, I take that back. I want to go and touch on something that James said a little bit first. James, your experience reminds me a little bit of Gary's experience in a sense. He started from the wargaming roots. He started from these tournament roots, and role playing became kind of a byproduct of that. From the influence of the artisan game, and as D&D became more about role playing, it was I can't help but see how that echoes a little bit his own personal experience. So I think that that's really cool that your evolution in gaming sort of it parallels the guy who created the game. Somebody that we all look at as one of our founding fathers.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in the past, 70% of if I was DMing, I would focus on the encounters,
right,
and using terrain and flanking, and really trying to challenge the players. Having a 2-hour combat, if that was half the session, okay, that's fine. 20 orcs versus the party, and then something flying would come in. Now, when I'm building adventures and for the campaign, I am trying to make them flavorful, but they're not the centerpiece like they used to be. And so, if you're making smaller encounters, you want them to be more flavorful and more realistic, or more elaborative than they were in the past. Because if you got a 2-hour combat, if you're explaining every blow, my goodness, you're going to be there all day.
Over in our chat room, we've got Gaetano and Phantom NJ are talking right now, and they're talking about the size of the group. And I think about your game, James, where you're notorious again for having big tables. I think that plays into it as well a lot. I mean, the more people you have, like you said, and like they're bringing up, it becomes a little bit more, the weight of description becomes a little more onerous, I think.
Yeah. I mean, just going real quick into that, I
Sure.
don't, it's definitely a burden sometimes, but if you've got good people there, as a DM, there's a lot of times you're not doing anything because 12 people got to figure out what they're doing. Unless you're going to force a caller kind of old school playing, they'll come in a room and I'll say, okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom and get a drink, and you guys will, after 15 minutes, figure out what they're doing.
Right.
And then you've just got to use that kind of almost teacher going around the room and keeping them on to date. So it's definitely doable, but if you're looking for people to have a lot of they want a lot of time to interact, it's hard to, city adventures would be something I would not recommend for 12 parties, because everyone wants to go a separate way, and there's just it's not going to work.
Yeah, you're splitting the party up big time, and you're doing a lot of it, especially in a convention setting when you got to keep everybody on track a little bit more because you've got an explicit mission to do. I think that's huge. I'm seeing some players, some people out here who are talking about the size of the table and how it changes things. Going from my personal experience again, and description of spells in combat, Dan, we were talking a little. You were mentioning that my favorite character I ever played was the second character I ever played. We were a little bit early in the curve as far as players go. I was fortunate enough to have a DM that was a college kid, and I was barely preteen at that point in time, and I was playing a magic user, and they were doing this thing where it was an echo of the Dungeons, what would come in the Dungeons and Dragons game. It's like, okay, you're coming from Earth, playing these kids, and you're all in these different classes. What do you do?
Okay.
And I played this magic user character who ended up becoming my favorite character that I've ever done, my highest level character. And he was apprenticed to Mordenkainen. And as a result of that, the whole role-playing experience was all about how Mordenkainen is teaching you how to do all these things. And so I would end up in a spell combat with somebody or cast a spell, and somebody that was a higher level character would look at me and just like, oh, Mordenkainen taught you that, didn't he? that it's like you're a student of Mordenkainen's because he could look at the spell and say the visual effect or the way that I did something was different than this other school. And I thought that that was really, really compelling. And so I wanted all my players to be able to have this very singular kind of trait where it was this callback to something that where they had learned from their master, their mentor, or maybe they were self-taught or something like that. One of the villains starts ridiculing the player because your footwork is terrible or something like that because he's self-taught. He was just a farm boy warrior or something like that. And so maybe when he goes to get his second level, he goes to a particular master to get trained and says, "Listen, I'm working on my footwork right now." And I really thought that that was important to capture that piece of the role playing because I know for myself it was such a big thing. So that's why when I have stuff like I have my Priestess of Wenta in your game, everything that she does is beer themed or mead or honey themed or something like that. Like for example, if she were to cast an offensive spell, it might take the form of bees coming out of her hand or something like that. Or when she put her hand on you to heal you, it would be like a honeycomb bandage or something like that as it healed. All of her potions take the form of different libations. And I think that is a way that you can draw players into the immersion of the role-playing experience. So Dan, that's where I came up with that first, but with it started with spellcasting to me, but then I felt like I wasn't giving enough to the warriors in the game, enough, or the fighters and the thieves. So I started applying that to their own things, and that's how I ended up with the descriptive kind of thing that I do, which I don't see a lot of DMs do. I mean, you see it a lot in written prose, like a DM will tell you, they'll write a story about their game or whatever, or you'll read it in a book. But I don't really see it too much in games, and it's something I try very hard to capture in the context of the game.
Yeah, and you do it very well, and I don't think I've seen really anybody else do it. None of the DMs that I've seen. I mean, there's been some very good. So you can be an extremely good DM without doing that, right? I mean, I think you got to stay true to yourself, and not everyone's going to be very. I mean, so I mean, you obviously have a good knowledge of anatomy because when I try to play you. I've got like the head being cut off 5 times, and then the player's like, "Oh, another head cut off. Wow, what is this? A sword of sharpness, whatever there is."
Dan's got a chart with killing blows: head chopped off, head chopped off, head chopped off. It's the same thing 17 times.
Right. I need to learn my anatomy.
Dan, I need to hook you up with Lord Gazumba from our chat because he's got the most elaborate critical hit tables I think I've ever seen. So maybe I can get him to send you one. James, you were going to say something about that?
Well, I was just going to say that I'm doing it more because of Dan, and Dan's doing it for because of you. So I think there is a confluence, and that's probably one of the advantages of going to a convention, which was before the internet. The way you learn how to play differently and validate what you were playing. And the other part I was going to bring up is what I find interesting. I find the spell casting when I start doing it even more unique than the combat. I think I've probably seen some version of it, but not as descriptive. But it validates one of the things in D&D 1E that's kind of strange. Read magic.
Right.
Okay, I know sleep. Why do I have to read magic when I see another sleep? Well, it talks about that every recipe basically is different. You've derived the formula unique to yourself. And so the way you've weaved that in to taking something that's mechanical, that's kind of, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to, well, no, that magic is this amorphous thing that you can get many paths to.
Right.
And that, it's almost, this is the monkey style of sleep versus the dragon style.
Right, exactly.
And, that is a very compelling and imaginative perspective. So, that's something I think you did a great job, and I'll be stealing it very soon.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. I go to your point. Have you ever seen a TV show or read a book in which, the protagonists go to a character and they read like a document, they go, "Oh no, I could just tell the way this is written. This is so and so, the work of so and so."
Right.
Everybody, yeah, well, I wanted to be able to capture that. You can't capture that without doing it you can't do it piecemeal. You kind of almost have to do the whole thing. And people who are familiar with my work for the different things I write, I refer to magic as the invisible art. You'll always hear me say that. But that the invisible art, just like there are a million artists out there with a million different styles, there's a million different practitioners and ways to go about magic. Um, Out there in the audience, if you guys have any questions you'd like to ask Dan or James here, we're about an hour and a half into the show. We're going to be wrapping up relatively soon. Dan, James, you guys have any final thoughts? Anything you guys would like to say about the game, Greyhawk, the convention scene? Much like the convention games, let her all hang out.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I'd just like to say that I'm thrilled that there's so much 1E still being played, and and you thanked us for what we're doing, and we'd like to thank you for what you're doing, because we're all in the same team here. It seems to me we're all trying to keep 1E alive and well for different reasons. I can't get into edition wars because I've never played any edition other than 1E. So for me, it's not about thinking 1E is better, because I have absolutely no idea if it's better. But I want to play 1E because I like the nostalgia of it, and I don't think nostalgia is a bad word. And I'm sure other people are playing 1E because they've played other editions and they prefer 1E. What's great about it is that there really is a renaissance now, and that there are so many people that are playing 1E. And I just feel very fortunate, I guess, to have come back to the game at a time when so many other people are coming back as well, because I realize I'm just sort of on the bandwagon here, right? I mean, I'm the kind of guy who picked this up after 30 years and was fortunate that, so many people like yourself, Carlos, were already blazing the trail and keeping it alive. So I'm just thrilled that I've been able to find that 1E is still alive and well after all this time.
I'm getting a lot of people out here in the chat that feel the same way that you do, Dan, and that 1E is better. I've got somebody over here. I have to reread my 1E books. I'm interested to see what edition Phantom plays. But much like you, I'm a little different than you in the sense that I played all the editions at one point or another, for the exception of 5E right now. And I come back to 1E all the time. It's like kind of like when you're coding, I guess. My former life, I did coding a lot, programming. And there's always a language that appeals to you because it does what you want it to do, you find yourself. It just speaks to you as far as this is, I need to do something. This is how I'm going to achieve it. And 1E, the engine for 1E does what I want it to do. I find it's really flexible, and it has the ability to appeal to a lot of different game styles. So that's why I like it. James, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, for me, again, growing up, I didn't really know about OD&D. It had left the scene by 82, at least at the local bookstore, and I because there wasn't a hobby store and a community. 1E was the de facto, and the basic, Moldvay were the two that we started with, and for me, they were, hand in glove. And so I've looked at other editions. I played 2E tangentially through video games and 3E. My sons have played 5E, and I played with them. And I'm glad 1E is moving forward, and either directly through original play or Ostric. But I'm also glad that it's moved to 5E. I don't want my kids to play first edition just because I want them to play with me, and what my son plays with me, my youngest son. He plays with it, but they need to have their edition, or else there won't be a game 50 years from now. 40 years from now, if there's not a 9th edition and everyone stops at 5th edition, that's not where this hobby needs to be. So either it needs to be evergreen, but it's still, there's nothing wrong with 1E. And to Dan's point, you don't need to be ashamed of playing it. Right. I think what should happen is what's happening with people like you, who are taking the source material and taking the best of role playing and using the 40 years of knowledge of what works and doesn't, descriptive role playing, not just wargaming, and moving that forward. So, and the last thing is, time is on our sides, but I've got 11 more years. Dan has 3. We rolled out how many years of life we have left.
Okay.
And Dan has 3, I have 11.
What dice did you guys use to dice that out?
I think a D20 we did.
Let's find out how much longer I have, just so just so we can talk on this conversation. Yeah. I have one of my new D20s that I just got over here.
Oh, wonderful!
And it rolls terrible. So, no, that's good news for my wife because our life insurance is actually pretty lucrative. So we're gonna find out here in just a second where we're at. I'm gonna die in. Oh man, I only got 5 years left.
Okay, well you got more than Dan. Okay. So time is on our side because as people get older, Vic is planning to retire down here. Okay. People still come to Florida, so we're waiting for all these old game. Dave Arneson, before he passed, he worked in Orlando, so it's a natural place so all these 1E players come, all ye unwashed masses, to Florida. So we are going to be the Gary County South. When Luke's tired of up north, he'll retire down here, and so we're just setting the seeds. We're the first settlers, and so we're really looking forward to not having to change because everyone that wants to play 1E will be down here eventually. Good
luck getting Luke out of Cali, by the way.
But, yeah, that may be a problem.
He loves Calabasas, man. But we're talking about additions, and this is I say this every show. I end up finally saying this every show. So this is this show's version of that. I find like little bit what James said. I'm super happy 5th edition exists. I'm super happy 4th edition exists, and 3rd and 2nd, because every one of those editions is going to speak to somebody else. And much like having a toolbox in which you have a screwdriver, a hammer, a ratchet, a saw, whatever, I don't want to try and screw a screw into some surface with a saw. I don't want to do that, okay? These are all tools. All the editions they all do something well, okay? And for what you want to achieve, the effect you want to achieve, they're all different tools in your box, okay? So if you want to play a miniature heavy game that is, that it's a little bit more like based on a video game style, 4th edition is there for you. If you want to play something that's a little bit more grognardy, where you can do different, you can either go rules heavy or super rules light, 1E is here for you. If you want scads and scads and scads of options, 3.5 and 2E are there for you. And I think that's awesome. So for me, there is no edition wars. There is none. All D&D is good D&D as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. Absolutely. There is that thread still. I mean, I played 5th edition and I didn't feel like when my son, at the time, 14-year-old son was playing with me and his 2 older sons and my cousin, I didn't feel like I was not playing Dungeons and Dragons. I felt like I was playing it, but it wasn't the same as we get to rest and we get all our hit points back. What is okay? Sure, sounds good. I could just shoot this cantrip over and over again. Okay, it wasn't. I cast my sleep. I'm the magic user. I'm done for the day. Or maybe it's push. I didn't even get sleep. I rolled whatever push is, a 4 on the starting one, and I'm waiting for that opportunity to push. So I think there's a style for all of that, and the tent is big. We want to get more people to play. We want them to play 1E because there's a story to be told.
Yeah, when I grew up, you were lucky if you had a sleep spell, buddy.
Okay, you could get light.
Right. I have spider climb.
Yes, you do. You do have spider climb.
Just so everybody, this is something I wanted to broach in this conversation here at the end when everybody was done with their questions and things. Dan is well known as being one of the biggest enthusiasts, along with my good friend Jeremy. My best friend Jeremy Brazil, of gnomes, and in particular the gnome illusionist thief. Dan, tell us of your love of gnomes and why everybody should love the gnome illusionist thief.
Look at the time. Hold on.
Oh, James, don't worry. You're going to get your counterpoint.
My connection is going bad. Go ahead.
You're going to get your counterpoint in a second. Dan, tell me about why we should love gnomes and the gnome thief illusionist.
Okay, well, look, gnomes are, they're not, if you think they're just a different type of dwarf, right off the bat, you've got a lot to learn.
You'd be right.
I recommend everyone, please read Roger Moore's point of view on gnomes in, the Best of, I think it was in one of the Best of Dragons. Yeah, see, he's got it. So, gnomes are just a lot of fun to play because gnomes are tricksters. And look, why wouldn't you like a trickster who actually likes to pull harmful pranks? So if you think gnomes are just happy-go-lucky, you're completely wrong. Gnomes they like to pull harmful pranks, and so you basically get to joke around, mess with people, and just say to the DM, I'm just role-playing my character. And to combine the illusionist thief, I mean, let's face it, we know they're the only race that can be an illusionist thief, right? They're the only demi-human, I believe, right, that can be an illusionist, right? It's human and gnome. I think that's it, if memory serves me correctly. And to combine an illusionist and a thief is providing skills for a thief that you're not going to get with any other character. And I would like to point, just turn me off when you heard it out. There isn't
No.
The internet,
I thought for a moment
turned
that
you
James was sabotaging your feed, though, because he was done hearing you.
I think the internet was done with you.
No, as James knows, we've discovered, I mean, not like we're, Columbus. I'm sure other people discovered this before us. But in the DMG, under the table for assassin followers, you can have a gnome illusionist assassin as an NPC.
Yes, you can.
So now that's even better probably than the illusionist thief. But I just think they're a tremendous amount of fun to play.
I would also say this, Dan, about the gnome illusionist thief, or in gnomes in general. Do you know what single ability gnomes have that has been most useful and most potent in my games?
Of course. Speak to burrowing mammals.
Yep. That ability right there has unbalanced so many games, it's beyond belief. That is a really super underrated ability.
Well, you need a DM. If you're going to play a gnome illusionist thief, you got to look at the reaction of your DM. Because if your DM is not illusionist friendly,
right,
you're not going to do it. You're not going to have a good game for your gnome. And if they are, if you're going to ask them if there's a burrowing mammal around, and they're going to look at you strangely and say no, so a lot of those abilities are going to be lost if you don't have a gnome. You should I urge people to only play with gnome friendly DMs.
Okay, now in my chat right here, I'm seeing that World of Greyhawk gnomes are no joke from somebody, and Dan, my DM, let me play a gnome illusionist assassin. Okay, we've heard point. Time for counterpoint, James.
Wait, can I make stop?
Go ahead, Dan. Finish off.
One more point.
Finish off.
Can I make one?
Sure.
You know who played a gnome illusionist thief, don't you?
Who?
Gary Gygax. Okay, I will now hand it over to James. How does he follow up with that?
James, why should we hate and ridicule and loathe gnomes in particular?
Point A. They're in your garden. These are garden gnomes. This is what I think of.
That's a different gnome.
When they're frolicking around. They are, that's fine, Gary Guy. Now again, I come from, and I know Gary, who's looking scourily down at me, that Lord of the Rings would not be a main influence. While it's listed in Appendix N, you could certainly go to a number of other works from Vance and all these others that would. But to me, you have elves, you have halflings, you have dwarves, you have orcs, you have goblins. That's what you have. I think they had it right when gnomes were monsters and they were not player characters, which is in the original, if I remember correctly, in the basic, you could not play them. And so somewhere, something happened. Maybe pictures were found. One of these gnome tricksters took pictures of various people and they blackmailed them and they became a character. They are derivative. That's my point. If you want to be stealthy and small, be a halfling. You want to be magic resistant and stout and honorable, be a dwarf. You want to be weird and creepy and talk weird like so, then be a gnome. They don't even get special racial abilities. Halflings get pluses and minuses. Elves get pluses and minuses. Half orcs get pluses. Gnomes get no pluses and minuses. They get some of the benefits of. They get the dwarven cousins, and they have the illusionist thing for whatever reason. So they're in the game. I accept them just like I accept that Identify is the ultimate troll job by Gary Gygax, so that you have to put magic items on. They are part of the thing.
Going back to the chat for a second, here's what we got here from your counterpoint, James. I've intentionally avoided those damn garden gnomes for decades just to ensure that I don't think of them as D&D gnomes. I've got from somebody. I've got, let's see. From a D&D perspective, I felt that the Dragonlance Tinker gnomes hurt the perception of gnomes, and then WoW killed it.
Yes.
So you got that. Let's see what else we have. I would consider letting the paladin kill a Kender for the good of the party.
Well, and then that expands, and Kender to me is halfling. The halfling from Dragonlance. It's the cutification. We had one cute race, halflings. Elves are flitty and serious, somewhat serious, but they can be flitty. Dwarves are dour. Now we have all these bird creatures and cat creatures and frog creatures, and they're monsters. They shouldn't be player characters. And the illusionist thief is the ultimate. I'm just like you said. I agree. I'm just playing my character. And then what did we get? We got the barbarian. I'm just playing my character. Oh, you found a magic wand? I just snapped it and I got experience points. Just playing my character party. So nothing says fun like watching the rest of the party get angry. So I think they're a party killer and they're useless. And but I've played them and they can be a lot of fun. So it's what I've embraced the love of gnomes. So look,
James, I can't believe after that diatribe, you just actually at the end slid in there that you're actually somewhat on Dan's side with that.
Well,
you almost had me there.
Well, what is it? The people you have a latent love for things that you hate the most, and so I'm a closet gnome lover apparently. So
he's played a gnome.
No, I don't love Forgotten Realms at all.
No, that's true.
At any rate, going back, I wrote in one of my first Patreon articles. I wrote just something about gnomes, in which this is my feeling about the gnome character, and it kind of goes back to what you said, James, about Lord of the Rings. I think that a lot of people's opinion of Dungeons and Dragons and their different influences about fantasy is informed directly by Lord of the Rings. And in Lord of the Rings, you have a human paradigm, you have an elvish paradigm, a dwarven paradigm, a halfling/hobbit paradigm. But the gnome is not reflected in Lord of the Rings. As a consequence of that, I went 35 to almost 40 years of gaming and never had one person interested in playing a gnome. It was only since I started doing convention gaming that I met people that enjoyed playing gnomes. To Dan's point, where I actually had to write an entire series of modules featuring nothing but gnomes because they were so popular in my games. Right. So I think that there's a place for them, but I do think that the Lord of the Rings paradigm hurt them a lot. And to Phantom's point in my chat right now, I think that the Kender / the cute signification, James, if I can coin your phrase, is I think that hurt them a lot.
Yeah, and I again, I didn't have the history. I was exposed to Lord of the Rings because I was fortunate at my school. Right around when I started playing, and we watched the movies. They had the animated movies. If they had more Conan movies or Fritz Leiber or Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, that may have influenced it. But to me, the default fantasy land is Lord of the Rings, and gnomes are not there. So they're this appendage to it. And that's kind of why I like the base races that came out. I'm not as enamored with the book that shall not be named, like which we didn't have time to talk about. But if they come to our show, we're gonna have an episode on the book that shall not be named.
I can't wait for that because I love the book that shall not be named, and the book that shall not be named is Unearthed Arcana. Power word stun.
That's right. No save. Exactly.
Dan, you had something you want to say about the gnome paradigm or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, listen, I just, we're tired of being silent. We are. Well, we play what we are. So we're a strong demographic, and we're not going to be silent anymore. What's going? Bill Delicious is eating a gnome. Well,
This is what happens when you leave me alone in the studio. This is what I do when you're not here.
Oh my God! What are you doing to Go Delicious behind closed doors?
You should take him with you then.
That is wrong. I'm taking Go Delicious with me next time. Get him the hell out of that house of horrors.
For those of you who don't know what Go Delicious is, it's Dan and James run a part of their show on GrogTalk is all dedicated to the Monster Manual, different creatures in it, in which they pit creatures against one another. Well, Go Delicious, I believe you guys rolled the giant ram, right? Was that Go Delicious?
Yeah, I think it was a giant goat. We got a giant goat.
And Go Delicious is the giant goat that they have rolled and actually won a few fights somehow, probably through an immense amount of die roll fudging. Actually won a couple fights. So.
Oh, wait a second. I think the giant goat is formidable. James, the giant goat, what he ate? He ate some sort of, was it a...
he got a knoll and a dwarf.
A knoll and a dwarf. That's the blood on Go Delicious's beard.
Yeah, they do 2 to 16 plus 2 to hit. They're nothing to be fool around with. They're like 3 hit dice. The giant goat. So,
and then tried to seduce a red dragon.
Yeah, well, that was kind of the Shrek thing. So
yeah. I did. That didn't work out very well.
No, it didn't. That she's still picking him out of her beard.
Speaking about goats, do you happen to know right off the top of your head how much damage a giant ram does on a headbutt?
I don't know about a ram, but the goat does 2 to 16. It was pretty ridiculous.
4 to 16 for that giant ram. I've been writing them in my in a current module I'm working on. I couldn't believe 4 to 16. That's a lot of damage, man.
Right. Yeah, you're talking average of 10 points. I mean, that's any first level characters going down.
Yeah, and not only that, but the hit dice are not insubstantial either. So it has a pretty good chance of hitting low armor class. So I was pretty impressed when I saw that myself. So Go Delicious isn't all bad.
No.
The last one was a black pudding versus, what was it, James? Against a what?
A Charon demon.
The black pudding was on the boat.
Yeah, so if just to give you a quick taste for those people who haven't shown a show, if you're interested in how a black pudding was dispatched by Jubilix to avenge an ochre jelly's demise, and now was trying to head back to the abyss, go listen, and has a fight because the Charon demon got stiffed by Jubilix for the ferry back, you can listen to our show. That's our teaser.
I was watching that show and I was back and forth doing different things and I missed the context of that. That's correct.
Oh, and a hat tip to Vic Dorso, who pointed out that the Charon demon should simply teleport away because he takes his boat,
right,
leaving the black pudding
in the sticks.
In the sticks, exactly.
That's right. So if that's your idea of spending your Saturday mornings or listening to podcasts, how we get random monsters to go back to their archdemon, demon lord Jubilix, feel free to give us a try.
I'm looking at my chat room right now again, and there is, just at the mention of Unearthed Arcana, the chat room blew up. I mean, there's like so many comments right now. So when can my people watch the GrogTalk episode about UA so they have a chance to see your thoughts about it and see you guys pick it apart? When is it happening?
Well, we're going to have to put it on the calendar. We have to accelerate it. I think it's like 3 episodes from now, but we'll send you a link. We'll let you know when it's on because you have said and Vic have said you'll be the defendants. We'll put the UA on trial and you'll be the defense counsel for that.
Oh, yes, I will. I'd be more than happy to. There's
All
a few
right.
things I won't defend about UA, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of it I will.
Well, we will definitely do that sooner or later. I'm sorry, Dan.
Well, we need to warn the viewers of the title of the podcast because otherwise they may not realize.
That's right.
That because it's going to be called the podcast that shall not be named.
That's right.
So if they're looking for any reference to the book, they're gonna miss the podcast.
That's right. It's the podcast that shall not be named. So if you and we put our announcement on YouTube. So if you go to GrogTalk, our YouTube channel, YouTube/GrogTalk, we have an announcement. Our next show is the 29th with Alan Hammock from Ghost Tower of Universe fame. But subsequent to that, we will accelerate that since you have some folks who want to hear about the book that shall not be named.
I love how blithely you just said that. I think you need to actually spend some more time on that. Alan Hammock is going to be on you guys' show. Okay, from Ghost Tower of Inverness. This is not just some dude that you just guys found off the street.
You're exactly right.
Huge, that's a huge coup. I mean, this is a major part of Dungeons and Dragons, the history of Dungeons and Dragons, and really for us that are for caslTawk, this is a guy who's important in Greyhawk history too. So I encourage everybody to tune in and watch that show just to see Alan. I mean, at one point in time, I hope to get him on caslTawk as well. So I'm eager to see how that all goes for you guys.
We're trying to play it cool.
Yeah. I see that, but I'm not playing it cool. I'm going to fanboy all over that one. So,
he's A3, I think, as well. He's one of the A series too, isn't he?
He's 2 of the A series actually.
Oh my, okay.
So and I am actually doing the next. I'm doing one of the hex crawls for you guys. Could you tell the audience when you can see me on your show to do your next hex crawl?
So this is A3, and so on February 29th, Saturday at 8 a.m. we will be live streaming it. Carlos will be on a little bit later than that. We'll also have Alan on. So we're going to do both of that. And then we obviously save the stream on YouTube, make it available. That'll be episode 49. And then if you go to grogcon.com, we post our podcast up there. And so if you listen to audio, we're on iTunes. If you go to GrogTalk, we're on iTunes. We're on iHeartRadio, Google Play, Spotify, all the major podcasts.
And these guys are way more entertaining than me. So you guys are going to really enjoy what you guys see on that show. Although even though that you guys are more entertaining than me, I am a man of the people, okay? So I was asked on my chat room to do this, so I'm going to.
Okay.
I cast Power Word Stun on you before. Here's Symbol.
Wait a minute. Let me see if I can.
I've got 2 copies.
Be careful; those will fall apart, won't they? You shouldn't hold them.
Actually, look, the binding's really strong on both of them, and I've got the premium over here that I saved you guys from.
Yeah, those are in pretty good shape.
Maybe the binding falls apart on people that the book senses dislike it, and that's what's happening.
I think it's how it is. It's like the Demonomicon of Igwalev, you know?
Because mine's all over the place.
Yeah, I've heard that about that. I've heard that a couple of the other books are like Oriental Adventures has a bad reputation for falling apart as well. I think it's when they went to the cheaper binding in order to save some money as TSR was in financial straits. I think that's just. I think it's an artifact mostly of that, but. Okay,
I have one word to prove that the book that shall not be named is problematic.
And that is?
Snurfeblin.
Snurfeblin.
Well, then let me ask you this: Why don't you take issue with Fiend Folio, which is when they were actually they were introduced even before that in the D series. Right. So why don't you take issue with that?
I do take issue with portions of the Fiend Folio.
But why not the Fiend Folio in total? Or is what you're really saying is that you're taking issue with a couple pages of
Oh my God, I'm being cross-examined.
I think you are.
There is the holy. There is the holy
Trinity. I gotta fight fire with fire here. I know who I'm talking to.
Well, Dan's thing. There is the Holy Trinity, and there are no other books.
Right.
Maybe deities and demigods.
No, I like deities and demigods.
Right. There's the Holy Trinity, and then the fourth one, and that's everything else is.
I like monsters from the Fiend Folio in their native habitat. So I like the carbuncle in the halls of Tis and Thane. So I don't think they should be let out in the general population. Most of those monsters, other than a couple, like the what's the snake-like one with the skull on the end?
Oh, the Necrophidius.
The Necrophidius.
That can be let out into the general public. But other than that, they should stay in their native habitat.
I just wrote 2 encounters with Necrophidii in the module I'm working on right now.
I tried to find the guy who wrote that. I found his name on Twitter, and I asked him, but it wasn't him. But I would like to have that guy on the show.
Oh, and that wrote the Necrophidii?
Yes, it was a fiend. It was a fiend factory, and it wasn't one of the usual suspects. So it was fiend factory. It looks like it was probably just a reader of White Dwarf who sent it in.
Did you know that the very first character ever created, or the very first creature ever created by Luke Gygax in publication history was in the Fiend Folio?
Really?
Do you know what creature that is?
I don't.
It would be the Bullywug.
Oh, the Bullywug. No.
Oh, okay.
That is interesting. No, I would have not guessed that.
Did you know that if you watch the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, it features almost strictly monsters from Fiend Folio because they wanted to sell a copy of it?
Yep, that makes sense. Because that was 82, so it was before Monster Manual 2 came out, right?
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, just so you know, Dan, this is what you can expect on Unearthed Arcana. I'm going to be on the show. I'm going to be hitting you. I'm going to be hitting you hard on that one.
Well, he's not past 1980, so he's going to be like, I don't know these events. He's going to claim the fifth as far as I don't remember anything from 1985. So
yeah, unfortunately, this isn't a criminal trial, so the fifth doesn't really apply, Dan. I'm sorry.
Wow, this is scary.
Yeah, well,
I give a lot of grief.
Well, we're going to come up, and if you all are interested in 2 hours of bantering of watching us be beaten down by Vic and Carlos, listen to us on GrogTalk. Probably sometime in March, we'll get this done. Probably after GaryCon.
We'll be sure to announce it on both our Facebook, on all of our Facebook platforms. So
that sounds great.
With that said, everybody, we're going to sign off for the night. I'd like to thank again James and Dan from GrogTalk and from GrogCon for showing up for the show. You guys were great guests. You're great guys. Some of my dearest friends in the hobby. Thanks for appearing on the show and talking shop with me for 2 hours. And I appreciate it very much.
This is a light day for us. We thank you. This was great. Thanks so much.
Wait. It's only we don't have 3 more hours?
No. You guys stick around just for a little bit on Zoom, and so I can say a proper goodbye to you. But for Dan and James, I'm going to sign off here in a moment. And next episode of caslTawk, you may get to find out why my favorite Fiend Folio monster is the Thork. See you later, guys.
See you. Thanks, guys.